All right, welcome everyone to this fireside chat today. Please do put your name in, where you're calling in from. I'm very excited to have everyone here. And I have a special guest, Jovita Tam. What we're going to be tackling today, since we're both international speakers, is how do you give a really great talk? And I want to tackle it from three angles. First, where do you even start creating a talk? Two, once you've started putting it together, how do you know if it's good or not? And three, how do you manage those inevitable nerves and anxious feelings leading up to your big day? What I'm most curious about is how Jovita and I will tackle this from our complementary but different perspectives. So, Jovita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Chris, for having me. I'm a business-focused data and AI advisor that helps company and people achieve their objectives. I'm hyper-focused at optimizing at the intersection of data and AI, the law, and the technical aspects of business.
Awesome. Thanks, Jovita. And for me, I'm Chris. I founded The Hidden Speaker, where I teach tech and data professionals communication and presentation skills. Because when I worked in the industry, I saw time and time again, technical skills took the cake, but that led to soft skills being put in the backseat. And as a result, colleagues and managers I had suffered in their career potential because they couldn't advance without those skills. What I want to do with my company, through the trainings at companies I host, through private coaching, my public speaking community, is changing that and giving tech professionals the skills they need to succeed. So without further ado, I'd like to jump into this discussion today. Let's tackle that first bucket. Where do you even start with creating a presentation? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, Jovita.
Sure. So let me take a recent example. So recently, I gave a talk at the Keynote X Theater at Big Data London earlier September of this year. And because this was the third time that I'm speaking at the Big Data London event, I wanted to challenge myself and I wanted to do something differently. I wanted to really see what I could discover along the way by changing and deviating from my regular process. So I started with an idea. I knew that I wanted to speak about AI governance because it's a topic that's very, very important for me. And right off the bat, I started to choose to do something differently. I went for quite a catchy title, and it's called How to Get Fired by Ignoring AI Governance. I've talked to some of my mentors, some of my friends, etc., and I was like, is it too much? Where does that stand? And I went a little bit back and forth on the title, and eventually I decided to settle on that. And from there, I basically nailed down on three personas that I wanted to speak to, and that would be leaders tasked with leading AI governance programs, business executives and product owners, and CDOs and CDAOs. The reason why I made that choice is because Big Data London is sort of a unique conference. It's a free conference. It has a lot of people coming, and you could potentially be working with a very broad audience group, right? And a topic like AI governance, it really is dependent on where you are in the AI value chain, what is the best thing for you to do right now. So I wanted to make sure that, the context bit is very squarely covered, right? That there's no confusion around that part. And thereafter, what I did was that I went and jot down a structure that came to my mind, right? And I knew that that would have been a boring structure. It's a structure that, I would normally go for, if you would, right? But because this is an experiment, but at the same time, I do have a deadline, I do need to speak in front of an audience, I want to make sure that there was something there. So I took the step. I was like, okay, well, I know how to make this work from this title, from this kind of basic outline. I know there's something there. And thereafter, I just set that to the side and I worked on it quite organically, which is very different from normally how I would approach these things. Like normally I'm very process driven. And in this kind of organic process, if you would, I basically noticed myself dividing it into two separate buckets, right? One bucket would be working on the framework and working on the flow, right? The other bucket was kind of noting down all of the cute examples, the analogies, and all of those things that I have used in the past that really resonate when I speak to people about this topic. So from there, I just, iteration after iteration, and it turned into the talk that I delivered. And of course, like, this sounds a lot more organized, but when I was doing it, it was, quite messy, and it was like, everything was happening in my head. Of course, I was preparing slides that I was moving around. I, used a visual aid of a mind map to help me organize some of these ideas. But that's what I get for experimenting, I guess.
Yeah. I love that, because what I hope to bring to tech professionals is process and organization, and some organic stuff in there too. Because what I see with technical skills when they're taught is people teach them with processes, with
Mhm.
frameworks, with acronyms and all that stuff. And for communication, especially technical communication, that's often missing from the whole thing. And what I found when I work with clients, when I work with people in my community, is when I teach them that regimented system that they can then use to apply in their own unique way, it all clicks together. It becomes so much easier. And the process I teach is similar to the one you described. We mind map things. We organize, what is the flow going to be? What is your core idea? I gave a TEDx talk 2 months ago. And as a part of that, everything has to tie back to that one core idea you have, because TED's mission is ideas worth spreading. Now I think it's actually changed to ideas change everything. But the premise is it has to be built around an idea.
Mhm.
And what I teach as part of the community and to my private clients is, once you have that idea, we can establish what are the main sections in your presentation that support that idea. How do you know what to cut out? Well, it's the stuff that doesn't support the idea. Then we can work on, once we have the skeleton, how do we make it exciting? How do we make it surprising and engaging? Add some emotionality, some stories, some analogies and examples like the ones that you shared. And all together, that can make a really great presentation.
That's very interesting. It sounds like there's so much similarities, but yet there are also elements of it which is opposite. I think what you
Mhm.
describe is what I would normally do to
Right?
put together my presentations.
Yeah.
And after doing it, a lot of times what I find is that it's harder, and it gets, I think, a little harder and harder to realize, am I really being boring about this? Am I really staying in the box too much? How do I kind of get out? Do you have any tips around that, perhaps?
Yeah. When I was coming up with my TED talk, my TEDx talk, I had the core idea in mind, which was, how do we make data communication more exciting? That's it. That's my idea. Then I thought, how do I make that idea exciting and surprising for people? So I could just start off the presentation with that question and say, how do we make presentations more exciting? That could be decent, but I wanted to go even deeper and make it mind blowing for people so it's memorable. So my opening ended up being, this is going to be the most boring start to a TEDx talk you've ever heard. And I wanted that because there are so many TEDx talks out there. The way to stand out is to be different, as you said, to think outside the box. So hopefully that is what people will remember. And that's what will make them hold their attention throughout the rest.
That's really interesting because I remember, like, going at my process, right? By the time that I was like, okay, I've built my safety net, I have a framework. What I noticed that I ended up working on were two things, right? The framework and, the cute examples and analogies. So it did seem like that, even though I told myself that I would completely do this outside of the box and different from what I would normally do, that, it ends up that there being quite a bit of similarities. But that could already be because, like, I do have an engineering background, right?
Yeah.
Maybe my brain is wired to think in a specific way.
Yeah. I found the same with the clients that I work with. Because they're technically minded already, they want a process. One client, for example, gives talks all the time, but they wanted a way to do it faster because they said they'd spend like 7, 8 weekends preparing for one talk. And they said they don't have time to do that anymore. How do we do this organized? So that's part of what I teach. But I also like leaning into uniqueness, because every person I speak to has their own way of approaching presenting that is authentic to them. And I find when the audience sees that authenticity, when it sees that you're just being you, you're having fun, and you're giving some important information, that's when all the stars align and the talk clicks.
That's really cool because I know that when we were preparing for this fireside chat, one of the things that I was tasked to do is to come up with some takeaways, right? At the end, and as you said that, I was thinking, wow, like that is actually one of the takeaways that I was going to share is that, the audience actually want you to succeed. And I think authenticity goes a long way, right? It really
Mhm.
is about bringing our genuine selves to the table, coming from a place where we are just sharing our ideas instead of asking for something in return. And I think the audience can really sense that. And I think you also bring up a really good point, and it brings me back to the time when I was working with a speaking coach, right? And it wasn't too long ago. And I think that everybody can benefit, right? If the means are there to work one on one with a speaking coach, is to be able to work with somebody and to identify the uniqueness that they bring to the table at that point in time. Because I think where we are at like changes all the time, right? And that part is always really exciting when you're like, oh, okay, you get that affirmation. Okay, it's not just me. Like you do see this as a uniqueness, and this is how we can make sure that through that we resonate with our audience.
Absolutely. I had the privilege of working with several coaches when I was doing my TED Talk. So I think every single person, no matter what level of experience you are, can benefit from having that outside perspective. I worked with three. One of them was a speechwriter professionally. So he was really good at helping me cut out the fluff in my content. The other one was more of a managerial product management background, helped me see things from more of that perspective. How can we package this a little better? And the other one was more technically minded. So they helped me refine those elements of the talk. What I found was every single person had a different thing to say. And that's wonderful because when we're creating the talk, we think everything is perfect because we have that curse of knowledge. We know why we put section A there and section B there, but someone else can say, well, that doesn't really make sense together. So working with someone with that expert background who can help you see things a different way, I think that's a tremendous benefit to anyone.
And I think it's interesting. You spoke about working with three coaches, right? And they're each a professional and an expert in their own right. But looking back at how I prepare my talks, I feel like that there's also a benefit in kind of sharing the talk with maybe friends and family or community where they come from a totally different background, right? Because part of the idea is I feel like sometimes like we get into this zone, like we maybe we work in the industry, we have similar experiences, and we'll be coming from like a relatively similar lens. But if we kind of change some of that, right? So maybe it is just looking at data from a different industry, if you would, right? Or a different level of maturity company in terms of the data and the AI. Maybe they would look at it and they go, okay, yeah, this is cool, but that's not really the way I see the world, or that's not the world that I see.
Mhm.
And there is perhaps benefit in kind of sharing our talks and our presentation with people that are coming from a diverse background and maybe even a non-technical background, right? Do
Mhm.
you find that in your coaching? Like,
Absolutely. I found it when I was coached in the sense that I showed my talk to my wife. She had no idea what I was talking about in certain spots. So I knew this is not going to work for the audience that I intend. And when I coach others, I worked with someone recently who had this masterful technical presentation, but they were trying to present it to a non technical audience. And I said, if you're trying to do that, it doesn't work as you intend because there are a lot of jargony terms in there. There's a lot of moments where I don't really understand where you're going or what the intent is. Only you and people of your team would. So I encouraged him, we need to look at this from a bigger strategic lens. We need to pull back, make the slides more accessible. And I find that that exercise helped him tremendously. Now, we've been talking about all these great things related to presentation. How do you prepare it? How do you know if it's good, that authenticity aspect? Do you have any tips for managing the anxiety leading up to it?
I think that's a good question. I think that For me, there are a few things. Like, I think that one is preparation. If I do feel like I'm well prepared, I usually feel better about it because there's the, okay, I've done everything that I've done, right? And I think over the years, I know kind of how prepped I need to be to feel comfortable and confident when I'm speaking to an audience. And so that's one thing. The other thing, because I do share the yoga practice, I always advocate for certain kind of breathing exercise just to help us regulate our nervous system before we go up there and speak. Uh, but other than that, not really. And of course, I mentioned that our audience really want us to succeed, and if we're up there just sharing, right? We just want to share what we know. Logically, there really isn't much for us to be anxious about. But of course, anxiety isn't about logic. So
Yeah,
that's a tricky one.
it is.
So what do you do?
I see this all the time with my clients and community members. Most of them, I'd say, come to join and work with me because they don't have the confidence they want in speaking or presenting. They want to feel good about it so they can get that next promotion, so they can speak on that next conference stage, so they can give a TEDx talk of their own one day. And what I tell them is along the similar lines to what you said. We have to remember that the audience is on our side, that they want to see us succeed. We have to remember that even if we make mistakes, in quotes, they're not mistakes if we make them opportunities. For example, during my talk, I had several moments where I messed up and I almost tripped over a wire at some point. My tech was malfunctioning, but I just kept going. And that's the lesson I give to all members in my community. If you just make it work, maybe you can play it off humorously too. Nobody's going to care or remember about it. The other tip that I like to give is that nerves and excitement are very similar physical sensations.
Mhm.
Because when you're excited for something, you feel those butterflies in your stomach. When you're nervous about something, it's the same butterflies in your stomach. The only thing that's different is the way you're thinking about it. So I tell people, you are feeling that sensation, but if you think about it through this lens, that you're excited for this event, you want to succeed. It's a bit challenging, and that's
Mhm.
why you're feeling that. But because of that, you care. And the nerves remind you that you do and set you up to succeed.
I think I've once heard a tip where it's like if you know, different, like all our brains work differently, right? For some people, they have this thing where, because I used to participate in theater and I used to work backstage, and I asked like the people that are on stage, like, the leading characters, how they handled this. And once I was told that they would think about, kind of the worst case scenario, right? And they would actually pre-think of a plan that they would like kick into, right? If the thing happens, let's say if they forgot a line or whatever, and then they'll be like, well, I've actually planned for the worst case scenario. I know what to do. And so it helps take a little bit of the edge off. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
I love that. And I try to make it even more concrete with
Okay.
not just visualization, but actually making it happen. So for my clients and community, I have them go through those worst case scenarios. So for one client recently, for example, he was so afraid, what if I get a question from the audience I don't know how to answer? So, well, let's try it out. I had him present. I pretended to be his audience and I asked him some really tough questions. I had him go through that exercise. He handled it fine. And he said, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought. And another concern a lot of clients of mine have are, well, what if I'm doing the presentation? And what if I have an unruly audience? What if people are talking amongst themselves? They're not listening to me. How do I handle that? So I pretended to be an unruly audience for that person, and I had them handle it. We tried different things that worked best for them. They felt it was much better after that because they actually went through the exercise. So practicing, whether with someone else or with other people, is tremendously helpful.
Do you find that I know because you not only do one-on-one, you also have a community, and sometimes the community would come together and practice together. Do you think that like it helps when you're kind of in a group setting and you realize that, the things that are plaguing at us, right? It's like the same top five for most people, and that, this fear is not unique to the individual that's like giving the talk. Because sometimes there's a feeling of, oh, everybody else has this figured out. It's just me that is still nervous at this stage of my career giving a talk. Like, do you think that helps?
It's absolutely true. And I'd say if you're feeling some way, someone else absolutely feels it. For example, what I like to do in the community is not just do a public speaking exercise, like let's work on this slide, what's a better title, or let's practice this sentence and say it with more emotion or more conviction. What I like to do is say, what does everybody else think about what person A did? Let's give some positive and maybe even constructive feedback. And what you see is there are all these perspectives. People say, oh, I was really nervous about doing the same thing. This is what I did to handle it. You can see that. And then one of those tips is going to stick for the person who did the initial exercise. What I find in groups and working on a scary skill like public speaking is it's so much less scary when you have people who are working on it together with you.
Awesome.
Yeah. The other question I'd love to ask is, so we've covered managing those nerves during a presentation. We've covered, all right, how do you start preparing for it, some organization, some process. And we touched on a bit, what makes a really great talk, the authenticity aspect. Do you have any other thoughts around what makes a talk really resonate with people?
I think I have a few ideas, but I would start with know your audience, right? I think that with a talk, it really is communication and it goes both ways, right? Although the format for a lot of these talk might be that you have somebody presenting or somebody speaking on stage, and there isn't that verbal communication back until maybe a question answer session at the end. I do feel like with a talk, there is a exchange of energy, right? And that's the difference between sitting there recording something and releasing a video versus giving a talk in front of a live audience, is that there is that feedback. And I think part of it is, in addition to this is my message, right? This is my talk, this is the title, this is the framework, this is the structure. And in my head, these are my perceived value adds to my audience. It really is about spending the time and going, okay, well, imagine I'm the person that's sitting in this audience, right? This is my persona. This is what I'm going through. And there are many talks out there, right? How can I really get into the heads of the people that are potentially sitting in the audience? And how can I tailor my talk, or how can it be as much of a conversation as possible, building that resonance? I think that would be one tip.
I love that. And I'll expand on it by saying we can establish that conversational exchange with the audience, that energy exchange, through interactivity throughout our talks too. I've seen some great talks that have polls and great talks that have raise of hand kind of questions, talks that maybe even have people get into small groups. I've seen work really well by making sure the talk is not just a lecture where we're talking at people, but talking to them and with them even. That's how we make it really memorable, because it becomes something they co-create with us.
And I would say pauses.
Yeah.
There's the tendency sometimes is, if we get nervous or whatever, we want to get through the material, want to speak as quickly as possible. Now, like sometimes the speaking slot is a little bit short and you do want to get through all of the material. But I do feel like that in many cases, less is more, right? You'd rather, very clearly deliver one point and give it a good pause that thought like really deserves. And I think that also makes a difference as well in terms of the exchange in energy, that you are giving the audience like an opportunity to digest, to make it their own, to resonate with it.
Absolutely. And we're heading towards the end of our session, but I'd like to wrap things up with a final thought based on what you said, which is what makes a good presentation. And my thought on that, it's not about giving as much information as possible. As you said, less is more, because we want it to be remembered. So it's not about how much information you give. What defines a good presentation is also not being perfect on stage, Mistakes are inevitable. They will always happen. So don't aim to get every single thing right. Just be yourself and be authentic, and people will enjoy that energy. The other thing I'd like to say about what makes a good presentation is it's not necessarily about making an outcome happen. So let's say you want to give a talk to inspire people to do something, to approve some funding, or to get some investment, or to vote for something. You might not be able to influence that action because it's not the right time. So that's not a metric you should strive toward. The metric you should strive toward is, as we talked about earlier, is my message clear? If you can make the message clear in your audience's brain, then when the time is right, they will take that action. All right, so I'd like to wrap up our session today with some high-level takeaways. The things we talked about were those 3 buckets. So 1, how do you prepare a good presentation? So you and I, Jovita, talked about organizing some kind of process. What is your core idea? What are some points that can support it? What are some nice examples and stories and analogies that can support those points then? And working through it organically, refining and editing. We talked about how to manage anxiety and nerves, remembering that the audience is our friend, remembering we don't have to be perfect. We just have to have a good time, because if we do, the audience will. And we talked about what makes a really great presentation, being authentic, being yourself, and also giving a really solid, clear message. Do you have any other takeaways you'd like to add to that?
I think no. I think you've done a very good job with the takeaways. I think it's actually, I do want to highlight on the importance of community.
Yeah.
And I think that one thing that we definitely have brought out is that there's value in coaching, getting a coach to work with us, no matter where we are along the way on the journey. And yeah, that's all I want to add.
Fantastic. And if people would like to follow you, connect with you, learn more about what you do, what would be the best way to do that, Jovita?
For now, it would be reach out via LinkedIn.
Fantastic. And for me, if you're interested in more of the community stuff I do, coaching I do, check out, this is going to be a first for me putting this up. Hopefully this works. There we go. So that's my website. You can check out some more free resources. I have blogs that cover everything we talked about today in even more detail. I have some free resources for coaching. So if you want one-on-one coaching, you can take a free assessment. I've coded it, so you get personalized recommendations based on what you fill in. And there's also a section where you can sign up for the community waitlist. So all spots are filled, but this waitlist will give you information about what to expect, what you learn, how in this community, it's really small group, fun, live sessions where we can all learn and support each other. And with that, thank you everybody for joining today. Really excited to have you. I hope you have some good takeaways, and hope you all have a good rest of your day. Thank you, Jovita, for having this session with me.